Welcome to Strange Truths and Tall Tales, the product of Newfoundland podcast. This is the place for anyone who's into Newfoundland stories, history, and culture. I'm Robert, your host and guide through the curious, the legendary, and sometimes even the downright strange. You might know me from my writing at Product of Newfoundland or my short videos online where I dive into the stories of this island. Here at the podcast, I try to bring those stories to life, from folklore to forgotten truths to the quirky traditions that make us who we are. In this episode, I have a heartwarming tale that comes out of the deeps. It's the story of Springdale's Christmas whales. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's explore the stories that make Newfoundland what it is, one whale tale at a time.
You're traveling through the fog, and just ahead is an island of mermaids, miracles, and monsters. Your next stop, Newfoundland, and these are its strange truths and tall tales.
If you want to see whales, Newfoundland and Labrador is the place to go. More than 20 species routinely pass through our waters, and the world's largest population of humpback whales, numbering something like 10,000 animals, spends the summer months feeding off our shores. When the fall arrives, most, but not all, begin a long journey south. A small number of whales linger late into the autumn, and a few brave souls even stay through the winter. In Newfoundland, these holdouts have earned an interesting nickname, Christmas whales. In 1978, a small group of these Christmas whales, some humpbacks and a lone narwhal, came face to face with the harsh reality of a Newfoundland winter. But they didn't have to face it alone. What transpired was a lesson in the good that comes from a community that cares. It was January 1978, and winter had set in. The bays of Newfoundland's northeastern coast were still teeming with herring, and where the herring lingered, so did whales. The food supply was just too good for them to abandon, so as long as the fish remained plentiful, the whales seemed content to stay. Hundreds of whales were reported. They were so numerous that one newspaper said they were cluttering up Triton Harbor and frightening the daylights out of fishermen. On January 9th, near Loon Bay, a dozen pothead whales found themselves in serious trouble. While they fed in the bay, the weather turned, and the ice closed in around them. By the time anyone noticed, nearly 5 kilometers of solid ice lay between them and the open sea. They were trapped. 'Cause whales, like people, need air, so it's dangerous for them to swim under an ice sheet. There may be nowhere to surface, and they could drown. So they were in big trouble. When people first spotted them, the whales were crowded into an acre-sized patch of open water. Now, it wasn't open by chance, it stayed open because of the whales. As they surfaced to breathe, they'd break the new, thinner ice. Word of the trapped whales spread quickly. Calls went out to the Department of Fisheries, and plans were made. But before any rescue could get underway, the Newfoundland weather did what it often does. It changed. A sudden January thaw melted enough ice that the whales escaped to the open sea on their own. It was a lucky break, one that wouldn't be duplicated everywhere. Springdale, Newfoundland and Labrador sits nearly 20 kilometers from the open ocean, deep inside Halls Bay, a long, narrow arm of salt water. In the fall of 1977, whales were lingering in the bay just as they'd been along the shores of Loon Bay. Residents watched as day after day humpback whales surfaced, dived, and fed in the cold waters of the bay. All through the fall, they awoke expecting to find the whales had moved along. But each morning they were surprised. The whales were still there. As Christmas came, surprise turned into concern. The water of the bay was starting to turn icy. First, a thin skim of ice appeared. Then patches of slush. Finally, great white sheets of ice began to float across the water. Still, the whales stayed. By January, most of Halls Bay was covered in a thick layer of ice. Kilometers of open water vanished. The whales that had decided to spend the autumn feeding there were no longer staying by choice. With ice covering the arm, they couldn't reach the open sea if they tried. There was nowhere to surface and nowhere to breathe. Before long, only a single opening in the ice remained just off the shores of Springdale. Just as in Loon Bay, the hole in the ice was being kept alive by the whales themselves as they surfaced for air. It was a desperate situation. Winter still had months to run, and the whale's entire existence depended on one small, shrinking patch of water. Then One morning, it happened. The last breathing hole had frozen over. Cyril Pelly, a Springdale resident and former Second World War pilot, owned a small plane. When he heard the news, he took to the air to see for himself. What he saw confirmed everyone's worst fear. The bay seemed to be solid ice. There was no open water anywhere. If nothing changed, the whales would drown. Pelly landed, went straight to the wharf, and set out in his schooner, the Willing Lass. He sailed into the harbor, forcing the bow through the ice until he reached the spot where the whales had been surfacing. There, he began to circle, again and again, crushing the ice. 5 humpback whales rose beside the vessel. They exhaled warm clouds of moist air. The animals were so close the crew could smell their breath, and close enough they could see the damage the ice had caused. Not only were the animals struggling to find air, they were tearing up their bodies doing it. The skin across their heads and backs was in rough shape. It had been cut and scraped by weeks of breaking through jagged ice. Left to keep the breathing hole open under their own power, the whales would destroy themselves. So Pelly made sure they didn't have to. They didn't have to face the task alone. Day after day, for weeks, the Willing Lass returned to that same spot, breaking the ice, keeping the breathing hole open, until at last an unseasonable warm spell set in, opening the harbor. The bay was still frozen, but at least the whale's breathing hole was safe, and the 40-ton animals had some measure of comfort. But the respite didn't last. The brief thaw gave way to bitter cold, and the harbor froze over once again. 4 of the humpback whales, now joined by an unexpected companion, a lone narwhal, were trapped in a single breathing hole roughly 2 kilometers from town. One of the humpbacks had disappeared. No one knew what happened. Maybe it made it to open sea, but there was little reason to be optimistic. It had probably drowned. At the new site, things were getting rough. The cold was so bad that the opening shrank to almost nothing. There was barely room for one whale. They had to take turns surfacing for air. By this point, the ice was too thick for the Willing Lass, so locals dragged an aluminum boat across the ice to the whale's breathing hole, and from that small vessel, they kept it open. It was grueling work. Not too far away, another humpback was spotted near Port Anson in Miles Cove. All alone, it was faring much worse. Finally, one morning, a heavy upwelling of ice was spotted not too far from its breathing hole. It looked as if the whale had tried to break through from below, but just couldn't do it. Days later, its body washed ashore at Port Anson. Nobody wanted the same fate for the Springdale whales. In late February, an icebreaker was sent into the bay to cut a channel to open water, but the whales wouldn't take it. Perhaps they were afraid to stray too far from the one place they knew they could breathe. So they stayed, circling the same small patch of icy water. Now everyone was worried about the whales. People walked out to the edge of the breathing hole just to watch them surface. They were able to get close enough to hear their breath and feel the ice shift beneath their feet as the whales came close. Before long, the crowds grew so large the police strung up ropes to keep people back. But curiosity soon gave way to concern. As onlookers watched, a new fear set in. Were the whales starving in front of everyone's eyes? The animals were confined to a single patch of water near the breathing hole. They were unable to roam the bay chasing fish as they might normally do. People wanted to help, and there was only one solution: feed the whales. They brought herring, as much as they could manage, to the hole in the ice. They could never supply the volume of food these massive animals could eat, but any little bit might help. Fortunately, humpbacks are known to fast for long periods of time. The trapped whales may have captured the imagination of Springdale, but as word spread, everyone wanted to know more. What was happening in Halls Bay was unusual, rare enough that researchers realized they were being handed an opportunity. Wild whales confined to a small, easily observed stretch of water. Scientists and journalists soon began arriving from across the province and far beyond. Dr. John Leon of Memorial University, who would later become famous for his whale rescues in Newfoundland, set up camp on the ice. For weeks he listened to the animals, watched their movements, and documented what was happening at close range. A specialist in animal medicine and the director of the Vancouver Aquarium showed up. After examining the situation, they became concerned about the narwhal. It appeared to be in poor condition. A proposal was put forward to net the animal and move it into captivity. That suggestion did not sit well in Springdale. Led by the local Women's Institute, residents pushed back hard. There was no guarantee that the narwhal would survive capture and transport. Worse still, trying to net it could panic the humpbacks and drive them away from the only breeding hole keeping them alive. The community decided the animals were better off where they were, in the wild and under the watch of caring locals. In the end, the plan was dropped. As winter crawled toward spring, the ice began to thin. In early April, a Coast Guard icebreaker cut a channel toward open water. At first, just as in February, the whales refused to follow it. But as the days warmed and the ice continued to melt, and new channels opened, something changed. The whales grew bolder. Then, one morning, people went to check on them. The surface of the water was empty. The whales were gone. After a long, punishing winter and an extraordinary outpouring of care from the people of Springdale, it appeared the surviving whales had made it back to the open sea. It was a winter unlike any other, and one that nobody would soon forget. There's no doubt that without the compassion and daily effort of the people of Springdale, the story would have ended quite differently. Instead, it stands as a testament to what can happen when people care, and to the extraordinary difference a community can make, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It's a lesson we can all take, a lingering gift from the Christmas whales. Most of the stories I share here happened a long time ago. This one, at less than 50 years old, is practically brand new. One of the benefits of telling a recent story is that there's more archival material. The tale of the Christmas whales was documented by the media, and CBC Newfoundland and Labrador's Land and Sea told the story in their 47th season. That was about 10 years ago, I think. The episode, called The Christmas Whales, is available on GEM, CBC's free streaming service. You can check it out and see footage of the actual whales and interviews with the people who saved them. It's worth doing. Check it out now. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to Strange Truths and Tall Tales. If you like this sort of Christmassy story, you can find more holiday history, folklore, and seasonal tales on the Product of Newfoundland blog. And don't forget to follow the show for more tangly, timeless, and totally true-ish Newfoundland stories. I'll see you soon. Until then, have some happy holidays.